And welcome in, 9 o'clock on your Monday morning. It is the Extra Points Hourhead and Jack Beltry, along with you on your Reaction Monday start of Rivalry Week. Carolina coming off of their fifth straight win in a row as the Gamecocks pick up the victory over Wofford on Saturday. Pretty much how we kind of expected them to. At the end of the day, you end up picking up a 44-point win. Not really a whole lot to break down from this game because, again, you won it exactly how you needed it to, and we can already kind of today start turning our attention to Clemson, I feel like.
Yeah, look, it was a good win for Carolina. Like, again, you got 74 players in that game, and a lot of different guys got to see action. It was really cool, especially for the seniors that got in, like Bradley Dunn scoring that touchdown at the end of the game and all the guys mobbing him in the end zone. That was cool. But, yeah, you're right. You won. You made some mistakes. You move on. But no one really takes it for much at the end of the day because it's Wofford. Now it's all about rivalry week and picking up this win because it's going to be a massive game on Saturday out in Death Valley.
By the way, that Bradley Dunn touchdown at the very end was a very significant for anybody that may had South Carolina taking the over.
Yeah.
Because that pushed them over the 42.5 going into the game.
That was just, I saw that after the game. I'm like, man, that is why you do not bet on spreads like that.
And the fact that it was within, I think it was like 20 seconds to go or something like that, literally.
Oh, there were 9 seconds left in the game.
Yeah, 9 seconds left to go in the game. And look, and Bradley Dunn's been on this team for a couple years. I can understand wanting to get into the end zone. But, yeah, if you had Carolina not covering the spread, and that was a tough beat for you.
Yeah, no, that was definitely one that I don't know what you're doing wasting your money on that game, but maybe save it for this weekend instead if you won.
Maybe so. It was the final home game of the season. We'll get into some of what we saw at home at Williams-Brice Stadium this year coming up in a minute. But as always, got to start things off with a little Sandstorm Pick-Me-Up.
Time to get hyped.
Here's your 9 a.m. Sandstorm.
Sponsored by George Sink Injury Lawyers. Just call all nines.
It is time for your 9 a.m. Sandstorm Pick-Me-Up, brought to you by South Carolina's largest injury law firm, George Sink Injury Lawyers. If you've been hurt in the car or at work, call George Sink now at 803-ALL-9s. Again, at the end of the day, when you pick up a 56-12 victory over an FCS team, there's not a whole lot to complain about. I will say the first half wasn't the smoothest. Wofford. I debated this on Saturday with Elijah and Jen. How long do you think they've been planning that first play of the game where they ripped off the long gain and pretty much almost set themselves up in field goal territory right away?
Well, considering the first drive is usually the most scripted one, I would say it's been in the works for, probably the entire week at least. I'm sure they've been wanting to do that one. And look, give Wofford a lot of credit. They came out swinging early. They didn't hold back any punches in this game, but I think it caught South Carolina a little bit off guard, and maybe the whole Senior Day celebration kind of got in the way of getting ready for the game and all that stuff. But look, I think Wofford gave South Carolina a good challenge at the beginning, but eventually the big team's going to always overcome that.
Yeah, when you have the talent, the level that South Carolina has, it's eventually going to take over. But it did not mean there weren't some uncomfortable moments in the first half. Certainly when Wofford scored their only touchdown of the game and suddenly made it a 14-9 game, we're all kind of looking like, what's kind of going on here? Carolina was very sloppy when it came to penalties in the first half. Lenore Sellers threw the interception, which I guess he just didn't see the safety from what it seemed like. A few mistakes, but you turned it on in the second half and walked out of there with the kind of victory that you needed.
Yeah, look, there were a lot of mistakes made in that game. If I am worried about one thing, it's probably special teams. I think that was probably one of the worst performances of special teams I've seen under Shane Beamer. And look, I think a lot of people are missing Pete Lembo. Like, I understand it, but at the same time, it's like you got to rock with Joe D now, and some of those mistakes just came on. I mean, look, they were ready on the fakes with the coverages they were in. They just weren't getting to the spots they needed to, I think, which was kind of the issue.
Well, and that was something that Beamer said going all the way back to his presser on Tuesday. Like, hey, this team is good at these kind of things. They're good at running fake punts. They're good at blocking kicks. So that's something that you have to be on the lookout for. And, yeah, it seemed like South Carolina was like I said, in position, but just not able to execute the way they needed to prevent those things from happening. But again, at the end of the day, it didn't really end up mattering. But, when you kind of talk about special teams as a whole this entire season, it has not been, like, amazing. Obviously, the kicking has been hit or miss, and Kai Kroger's been fine. But compared to what it's been in years past, it's not something that we have been able to rely on as much, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't know if we're getting that special teams touchdown this year.
Hey, don't give up hope, man. $1,200 this weekend.
Yeah. And look, this Clemson game this weekend, you might, I think back to 2 years ago, there was definitely some special teams was a very important part of that game. Number one, Kai Kroger had a great game, probably the best of his career, kicking in that game. And number two, Clemson, what was it, the muddle huddle that they ran on the kick return, and it ended up costing them. Stuff like that could always pop up in this game. Not saying Dabo Swinney's going to run the muddle huddle again, but look, you can never rule out the fact that you're going to need to bring your A game on special teams, and if you're South Carolina, you got to be ready. You got to. I'm not saying you need to do trickery, but you need to be prepared for it just in case, because that performance on Saturday just was not up to standard.
Well, that's something that you hope you can take from this kind of game as a learning experience, right? Saying, okay, well, yeah, we did dominate this game at the end of the day and won by 44 points. There's some things we need to clean up, namely when it comes to special teams as well as penalties. The penalties were something that really stuck out to me, and I go back to the first half of the season, and Carolina was one of the routinely most penalized teams in the entire country, and they haven't completely erased it in these past couple weeks, but they've gotten a lot better. I put the stat up at halftime that they'd been penalized 6 times by the end of the first half. The last time they had more than 6 penalties in an entire game was all the way back when they played Ole Miss. They've been doing better as of late, and I don't know if it was just the emotions of senior day or just, looking ahead to Clemson, but a lot of simple mistakes were being made early in that game for Carolina.
Yeah, there were 4 penalties at the end of the first quarter, and one of them wiped off the Delvon Campbell 50-yard touchdown.
Yep. With
Vershawn Lee being downfield. Yeah, look, it felt like one of those early games in the season. If you told someone that South Carolina's playing Wofford, you'd probably think they're playing in September or whatever, or August. But that is what it felt like. A lot of mistakes made in this game. Penalties mainly were kind of just. Now I will say, to kind of support the other side of this, the officiating has been awful. That was another bad performance by the officiating on Saturday. However, South Carolina didn't help itself with the whole Nikki Minwari penalty situation. There's no need to do anything crazy there, but what do I know? It's just a lot of these mistakes are things they would have made 2 months ago, but now it's you're kind of bringing them back for a game. Let's hope not next week you don't have 8 penalties, because that's not going to be good.
Yeah, Clemson's certainly a team that can take advantage of those mistakes a lot better than Wofford certainly can. So, again, those are the teachable things that you can have coming away from this game, because that's the thing you kind of wonder about, if you go out there and smoke an opponent 70-0, it's okay, well, you build confidence, which is good, but what can you learn from this going ahead to next week? And, again, Carolina with special teams tough with the penalties certainly has a few talking points, at least this week, to help those guys focus in on what is going to be a huge game against Clemson with high stakes at the end of the day, which we'll get to here in just a moment. But again, this Wofford game, and you phone away in 803-404-6100 as always on a Reaction Monday. It builds confidence, if nothing else. You went out there for the most part, you did your job, you won by a lot, and it doesn't matter who the opponent is on the other side. When you win a game by over 6 touchdowns, you're going to come away from that feeling pretty good.
Nameless, faceless opponent. That's all that matters, and you got production from a lot of different areas in this game, and the important thing is you were able to bounce back in the second half and play much better, much more up to the standard of Carolina football this year.
And the biggest thing, too, is nobody new got hurt. Yeah, you were dealing with a lot of injuries at tight end and stuff like that. Jared Brown's been nicked up kind of the entire year, but for the most part, there was no new injuries to worry about coming away from this game.
The only one that might be a little concerning is Ventravius Jacobs is a little banged up.
Yeah.
With a hamstring injury. That might be a problem, but other than that, you really hope the tight ends are able to get healthy. And look, Brady Hunt's not going to be playing this week, but Josh Simon had a boot on his foot. So What does that mean? And Michael Smith, what's his status? So we'll hopefully learn more throughout the week, but you would definitely like those two guys back, because especially Simon, because he plays such a critical part in this late offensive success.
We'll hear a little bit from Coach Beamer coming up in a minute. Let him talk about how they should enjoy this win, but also kind of focus ahead to Clemson as well. And by the way, you're right that Vendravius Jacobs' injury, he just kind of got like twisted the wrong way. It seemed like the way that he landed almost kind of like did a split. Now he's somebody that's not been featured in the past game as much these past handful of weeks, as we've kind of seen the emergence of guys like Carber, obviously Campbell taking on bigger roles. So I don't know how much that affects your game plan going forward this weekend against Clemson. But like you said, the tight ends, that's something that could definitely be felt. And look, you held out Josh Simon for precautionary reasons. Hopefully he'll be ready to go this weekend. But we'll see. Hopefully that doesn't end up being too big of a factor.
Yeah, you really hope it's not too big of a deal, that they're both able to get healthy. And even if they're not 100%, they're close to it. That's better than not having them out there, because, I mean, look, South Carolina doesn't really have that next title. You had to start Luke Doty. Not an issue, but you would much rather have your top guys out there.
Yeah, and that was something that Beamer addressed after the game. Like, one of the questions he was asked, it wasn't because Doty was a senior, was trying to get him reps. It was because they literally didn't have an extra tight end to account for, so you had to go into a lot of the 4 receiver sets there, which is something that I didn't even think about in watching the game, but it makes a lot of sense when he explained it afterwards.
No, it definitely makes sense. And Luke's versatility really helps. So he can kind of play as that tight end or slot guy a little bit, but he did his job, and I'd be fine with him out there on Saturday. But if you can get one of those two guys back, or even both, Michael Smith or Simon, that would be. Hey, I want to tell you about our show sponsor, PL Wine Pool and Spa. They're an award-winning swimming pool builder that's been in the business for 25 years with more than 40 years of pool construction experience. They service the entire Midlands area, whether you're looking for weekly cleaning maintenance or chlorine to salt conversion, with services like safety cover installs and safety fence installs. If you're maybe looking to add a pool to your home, this is definitely the place to go, because when I'm looking to purchase a home in the future, or I already have a home and I want to add a pool to my backyard, you already know this is the place I'm going to go. So you can check out all their offerings at the showroom in Lexington, South Carolina, and you can talk to their experts about any and everything you might need. Their retail store is located at 5541 Sunset Boulevard, and you can also check them out online at PLWinePools.com.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyra Ed and Jack Beltray along with you on your Reaction Monday. Again, Carolina beats Wofford 56-12 on Saturday. Not the game you can dive the deepest into by any means, but a good win nonetheless to give South Carolina a 5-game winning streak, which is, by the way, Jack, did you know this is the longest winning streak actively in the SEC as of right now?
I did. And also, more numbers for you since you're throwing these great records out there. I'll add to it. That is their longest winning streak since 2013.
Yep.
And I think the longest, if they win this weekend, which would be 6, the last time they did that might have also been 13, but if not, it would be, I think, 87 or 88. So it's been a while, but you know what? This team is playing really good ball right now. And, hey, I mean, look, I think they deserve to be in that conversation for one of the better teams in the SEC this year.
Yeah, it's certainly looking that way. And, again, we're not going to put as much stock into beating a team like Wofford because, again, talent-wise, you're way better than them and you shouldn't have any problem with that. But let's hit cut number 16 here, Corey. This is Coach Beamer after the game talking about not only enjoying this win but also looking ahead to the stakes against Clemson this weekend.
I'm going to enjoy this one. I'm not going to go home and immediately pull out the iPad and start breaking down Clemson football. I'll be in the office about 7 a.m. tomorrow morning doing that, but that's a normal Sunday for me, being back in there early and eager to get to work. But, no, I think it's great, Phil, that I'm assuming they won, right? Okay, so it'll be great that it's two ranked teams. It's a great rivalry. It's the best rivalry in college athletics, in my opinion, just because of what it means to all sports in this state. And I think it's great for the state of South Carolina when you got 2 ranked teams playing a meaningful game at the end of the season. And it should be that way every year. And I love being a part of this rivalry and got a ton of respect for Dabo and consider him a friend. And he and Kathleen are awesome. And but we will get back to work tomorrow. We're going to celebrate the heck out of this one and enjoy this one. Recover tomorrow, learn from this one because there's a lot to clean up from tonight. Offense, defense, and special teams. We need to be a lot better than we were tonight. I mean, the score ended up great, but there's a lot for us to clean up. So it'll be a normal Saturday night. I wish I could celebrate. I'll leave here. I'll go do the radio show with Todd. I'll go out on the field. I'll tape the TV show. So it'll be a while before I get home anyway, Phil. But once I get home, I'll enjoy this one for a little bit and relax, and I'll be jumping out of bed tomorrow morning early and can't wait to get to work.
We'll get to the Clemson stuff here in a minute, certainly, but I think it's important to kind of go back and look at what the home slate was this year. And as you mentioned, you should enjoy every single win. Winning's hard, no matter who the opponent is that you're playing. But if Carolina's home schedule doesn't perfectly encapsulate what a roller coaster of not only this season for Carolina football can be, but the entire college football season, let me run through this real quick. We have a Old Dominion game where you won by 4 points, and we were all sitting here on that Monday morning going, "Oh no, man, this team might not be very good," right?
Yeah, no, we definitely did. No, totally. Like, I think right after that game, it was like, I mean, keep in mind, that was the first game post 5-7.
Yep.
And I mean, look, it took a last-ditch effort to win that game. Old Dominion gave Carolina a lot of problems. Heck, they just gave Marshall a lot of problems. So Old Dominion's not some fluke, obviously. But yeah, that first game of the year was definitely a head scratcher for sure.
So you go on the road, you beat Kentucky, great win there. You come back home, college game days here. You're bringing in a ranked LSU team. Stakes are very high. Just a back-and-forth game. Carolina jumps out to the early lead. Lawrence Sellers gets hurt before halftime. You play this crazy second half. You line up for a game-winning field goal. Herrera misses it. There's controversial calls, and we're all walking away from that game wondering what could have been, and now you're 1-1 at home.
Yeah, it was – oh, man. People will – that's the thing, man. When this season's over, and I think we know how it's going to go, you know that game's going to be talked about till the end of time, man. It's going to be one of those big what-if type of games.
So then you get Akron after that, pretty routine win, much like the Wofford game, 50-7. Besides Rocket Sanders, nobody really got hurt in that game. You felt pretty good going into the bye week, and we're sitting there saying, okay, 3-1, solid position, kind of where a lot of people hoped they would be going into that first bye week. And then Ole Miss came to town, a ranked Ole Miss team, one that was very good and very talented, but we thought South Carolina had the capability of holding their own against them. And coming out of a bye, they completely laid an egg and got beat by 24 points.
Yeah, I wonder if those two teams play now, what the score would be. But that was that's going to go down to South Carolina's worst loss of the year without question.
After that, you go on the road for a couple weeks, lose to Alabama, tight game, beat Oklahoma senseless, come back home against an A&M team that was undefeated in conference play, coming off of a huge win against LSU. Emotions are high. They're top 10 in the country in the AP poll, and especially in the second half, Carolina beat them pretty soundly by 24 points. And people are storming the field. It's crazy.
Oh man, that game was crazy. Just man, that was when it felt like, all right, this team, they're on a little bit of a roll here. Let's see what they can do next.
So after that, you go on the road to Vanderbilt, picked up a pretty easy win there, 28-7. In the past 2 weeks, crazy win against Missouri, back and forth. You have to go down the field, 2-minute drill, win the game that way after you'd given up the late touchdown with Kilgore to Luther Burden, and then you followed it up with a 44-point victory over Wofford. Those were just the home games.
Blowout wins like Akron and Wofford. Those games probably were tighter than they should have been at one point, and look, that's Carolina. This is Carolina football kind of in a nutshell, to be honest.
Well, again, through all that chaos, you're sitting at 8-3 right now. Huge game this weekend, maybe the most important Palmetto Bowl, at least of our lifetime, but certainly in recent memory with everything that's going to be on the line, considering all the help that you got this weekend. We're only scratching the surface on this, by the way, because you're hanging out with me from 12 to 3. Filling in for Terry. We'll go really in-depth into what happened this weekend, but we will give you a brief overview of all the chaos that unfolded for most of us once we got home on Saturday night from watching Carolina beat Wofford, to where you wake up on Sunday morning going, did I really see what I saw over the course of this college football weekend? It felt that way.
Yeah, it was absolutely nuts. And for South Carolina, this was probably about as good as it could have gotten this weekend.
So we'll dive into that coming up next. What's on the line this weekend as Carolina takes on Clemson. It is rivalry week, by the way, sponsored by our friends over at Columbia Graft on Green Street. And we'll be hating Clemson all week long, getting you set for the Gamecocks and the Tigers coming up on Saturday at noon to wrap up the regular season, all right here on the game. It is the Extra Point, Tyler Head and Jack Belcher, a guy, Corey Parson, hanging out and producing today on your Reaction Monday on the game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyrod and Jack Feltree along with you on your Reaction Monday start of rivalry week here for South Carolina, taking on Clemson coming up on Saturday. And look, we know Carolina has had a small chance to make things happen these last couple games and maybe put themselves in position to make the college ball playoff. But we went into the weekend knowing a lot of chaos needed to unfold. How is the number 5, number 7, number 9, number 14, number 15, and number 16 teams all losing ahead of South Carolina for chaos, Jack?
It was just about as good as it could have gotten. Like, look, and all those teams lost to unranked teams for the most part outside of Indiana losing to number 2 Ohio State.
That's correct.
And then also BYU lost to Arizona State, who's going to move up in the rankings. So, look, this was about a dream scenario for Carolina. I actually asked Shane about this yesterday on the teleconference, asking him, like, hey, did you watch any of these games yesterday? And look, I mean, we're not stupid. Like, we all know here that these games going on around the country helped Carolina in some way. And he recognized that. He was like saying he was stay up till 2 a.m. watching Southern Cal UCLA. So he's a sicko like all of us. But you know what? Yeah, like Saturday was massive for Carolina. And look, if you don't believe in them getting the playoff, that's fine. But like the odds are definitely there. And it could potentially happen if some more things roll their way.
So as we look at the All-State playoff predictor, Carolina, as of right now, has a 23% chance to reach college football playoff. With a win against Clemson this weekend, that percentage jumps all the way up to 58%, which we assume is, Clemson's going to be ranked maybe, again, one spot ahead of, South Carolina going to this weekend's matchup. So Carolina has the opportunity to be a higher-ranked team than them to help their case a little bit to try and jump into what is, and we'll have to see what the playoff committee's rankings look like tomorrow, because the line was drawn at 10 this past weekend because Tennessee was the first team on the outside looking in, and you had 2 assumed conference champions on the outside of the top 10 in Boise State. And at the time, where the line's going to be, I'm assuming it's probably going to be somewhere around 10. So again, Carolina, between what happened last weekend and what happens this upcoming weekend, is going to have to find some kind of way to jump up 10 spots if they want to make the playoff.
Yeah, look, I don't know where they're going to be at. I would say for Carolina, I feel like 14 to 15 is probably like the sweet spot. And I think that is good, but I'm curious to see because we know Clemson's going to probably be ahead of Carolina.
Yep.
But who else is going to be ahead of them? Are Alabama and Ole Miss going to be ahead of South Carolina? If they are, how does that kind of impact things? Like those 2 teams don't play anyone good this weekend, even in their rivalry games. South Carolina is going to play Clemson, and they're going to jump up if they win that game. So it'll be interesting to see how the committee views Carolina because – I mean, the AP poll yesterday, only jumping up to 16, and then Clemson jumps up 5 spots to 12 was kind of egregious, I'm being honest.
Yeah, and again, the AP poll is irrelevant, especially this time of year. You bring up a good question because I'm wondering the same thing. Okay, is the committee willing to rank Carolina ahead of Ole Miss and Alabama, 2 teams that they lost to, and in Ole Miss's case, pretty bad in that case by 24 points. Now, the committee has shown they are not afraid to rank teams ahead of teams they had beaten. Carolina was recently ranked ahead of LSU when they came in at 21st in the poll going into the prior weekend. So it's not uncommon for those kind of things to happen, but I do think it sets a precedent, right? That if Carolina finds themselves behind those 2 teams, even with the win against Clemson, it might be hard to jump over them considering the head-to-heads.
And here's the thing, man. How does the big brand bias, whether you believe it or not, how does that play into this? Because as we know, since the inception of the playoff and even before the BCS, Alabama typically gets the benefit of the doubt, and they usually get in when maybe they shouldn't. I don't think they should this year with 2 losses to 6-6 teams potentially. Like that is going to be really hard to overlook. But at the same time, head-to-head does have to matter to some extent.
Mm-hmm.
But like again, the committee already set the precedent that because LSU hadn't been playing good football, they dropped them behind South Carolina. even though LSU had beaten them earlier in the year. So I wonder if the same applies here, because Carolina's playing just about as good as football as anyone. So you should reward that. Longest win streak in the SEC. But at the same time, how does the head-to-head matter in these cases? Because, look, Ole Miss and Alabama are not playing good football right now. They've dropped some key games. But will that be enough to drop them behind South Carolina? I wonder that, honestly.
And I've said this many times before. I'm a firm believer that the committee sets chess pieces, right, when it comes to these rankings on things that they are anticipating to happen in the future. And so Alabama came into the weekend number 7. They lose to a 500 and unranked Oklahoma team. Ole Miss goes in the weekend at number 9. They lose to a 500 and unranked Florida team. So just assuming that all the teams behind them are going to move up, so that would put them behind at least 4 teams. So if we're just going off that math alone, that would have Alabama no higher than 11th, and that would have Ole Miss no higher than 13th. So if we're going off of that, and if we're saying the committee's not going to put Carolina ahead of them, it seems like the highest Carolina could go would maybe be 14th or 15th. Now, how much is the committee punishing these teams for losing to unranked opponents? We'll have to see. Again, this may be the most convoluted and complicated playoff structure we've ever seen, because now so many more teams are in the conversation. Because let's think about this. You know, in years past, once all these teams got to their second loss, you're done. Like, you're irrelevant to making the 14 playoff. And yeah, we can split hairs on who's 11th and who's 12th, but it doesn't really matter at the end of the day. Now it does. And now the committee does actually have to legitimately look at it and say, okay, I know Alabama beat Carolina by 2 points at home, and it was this crazy game, and Carolina nearly pulled off the miracle comeback, and Ole Miss beat Carolina pretty handily by 24 points in Williams-Brice Stadium. But are those teams better than them as of right now? Because, again, Carolina, with the longest win streak in the SEC, surging here at the end of the season, the defense has been playing good all year, the offense has finally come together. Would they value that more than what those two teams had done to Carolina earlier on in the season is the question.
Yeah, we have to also bring up this. I mean, look, we truly don't know what the committee values, and I think that is kind of a problem because, man, like, I would like to know, what do they care about most? Is it strength of schedule? Because obviously it doesn't seem to be the case, since you probably know Indiana's not falling out of the top 12, and they were ranked so high even with a 100th plus strength of schedule. How does that matter, you know? And what have you done for me lately? I wonder, how is that going to be brought into the fold? Because, look, however you want to spill it, you should be punished for losing. You should be punished for only scoring 3 points on the road in Norman against a bad Oklahoma team that South Carolina went in there and the game was over in 5 minutes. So, and look, Ole Miss has 2 bad losses to Kentucky, a common opponent that South Carolina beat in Lexington pretty handedly, and then Florida, who, I mean, look, they've been playing better lately, but let's face it, they're still a 6-win team. So I think you have to punish teams for losing these games that they should normally be winning. That does not sound like 2 top 12 teams to me, because I don't think Ole Miss is going to make it. I don't think Alabama should make it. Though, look, if it came down to it and the committee really had to pick one team that was on the bubble to get in, it wouldn't shock me if it was those 2 teams ahead of South Carolina, even though the Gamecocks are playing better football than both of them by a wide margin right now.
Yeah, to me, tomorrow night will tell us for sure if they are willing to put a 3-loss SEC team in to the college football playoff. And look, the when you lose is very important. Like I said, Carolina's playing really good football right now. The fact they could potentially end the season on a 6-game winning streak, I think helps their case, because you can't lose late and be looked at the same way like in Alabama and like in Ole Miss have done at this point in time. I think Carolina's has got the best shot of anybody to be a 3-loss team in the SEC. I just don't know if the committee is willing to do that.
And they also need a little bit more help around the country. Like,
they do.
Yes, they got plenty of it with 6 top 16 teams losing. However, you're going to need more of it. You would probably like another domino to fall in the SEC, like, for instance, in Tennessee losing to Vanderbilt, or it would honestly help if Alabama or Ole Miss lost again. I mean, look, both those teams are probably going to be in your way, so you need them to get out of the way. And look, Carolina, at least in my opinion, I know they had the loss to Ole Miss, but if there is one saving grace, I don't feel like they have a bad loss in terms of they haven't lost to a team that they probably should have beat. You know what I mean? Like they didn't lose to an under 500 team or anything. So look, it's a very complicated slope to talk about with where South Carolina's going to be ranked and what needs to happen and all that. But the point is they are in a much better spot now as opposed to 2 weeks ago when you're wondering, all right, can they get help? They definitely did, but they're definitely going to need more of it moving forward.
Yeah, and again, we have the entire day to get into all the specifics of this and what has happened and what will happen coming up with tomorrow night's rankings. But look, Carolina did their job. They won, and that's the best thing you can do for yourself, especially by covering the spread against an FCS team. So we'll see what happens this weekend. Plenty to get into ahead of the Clemson game coming up on Saturday. But on the other side, do you need to talk some basketball? Because something did come to an end yesterday when it came to Don Staley's crew. That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Jack Beltry on your Reaction Monday, start of rivalry week here on the game. It's all right here once again telling you about our friends over at Twin Peaks right down the street in the Vista. It is a fun week as always, as any week would be, but especially this week as you can hang out for their Black Friday costume party and try some epic handcrafted cocktails at the costume party on November 25th through the 29th. That is in the entire week. You can try things like the Wild Turkey 101 Stone Sour, Hennessy Spicy Mango Lemonade, or the Traveler Gold Rush. And hey, speaking of Black Friday, you can come and hang out at Twin Peaks and take in a big-time AFC West matchup with the Chiefs and the Raiders taking each other on at 3 o'clock. And you can tailgate the game and score baller deals all day long during that Black Friday costume party. As always, I tell you about it. They got TVs as far as the eye can see, those 29-degree draft beers, and delicious food as well. Never a bad time to hang out at Twin Peaks, especially this week, right down the street in the Vista.
Bruins will inbound, and UCLA will end South Carolina's 43-game win streak as they lead wire to wire and knock off the top-ranked Gamecocks here at Pauley Pavilion, 77-62. Bruins improved to 5-0. Gamecocks suffer their first loss to drop to 5-1.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour head and Jack Belcher along with you on your Reaction Monday start of Rivalry Week. As called yesterday afternoon, Gamecock Sports Network with our guy Brad Muller. And, well, Jack, all good things come to an end, including Carolina's recent new record 43-game win streak as they fall to the Bruins 77-62 in a game that, quite frankly, they just never were really in.
Yeah, this was bound to happen. Like, the way they'd been playing, I mean, look, you kind of sense that, like, okay, they beat Clemson by 30 points, but if you looked at just particularly great, look, I mean, they went 8 or 12 from 3. That's solid. But you're also getting out rebounded. You have a lot of turnovers, and your key pieces just aren't really playing to the standard that maybe you wanted them to. Raven Johnson has really struggled this season, and she's a continuous starter for this team. She only had 3 points on one of 5 shooting, and I don't know what her exact percentage is right now, but she hasn't been shooting great this season, and that's a concern. But there's also a lot of other concerns. I know people are throwing it out there that, South Carolina doesn't have a big paint presence because Camila Cardoso is not there anymore, and she's leaving a huge hole with South Carolina not being able to really fill it right now. That's true, but let's also keep in mind, and this is a good point I saw somewhere earlier today, when she was in Brazil last season, South Carolina had to kind of manage without her for a few weeks, and they seemingly did so just fine. So, look, it's an issue, but it's not the issue. I think the biggest issue for me, and it's cliche, but I think it's true, I just don't think they have the chemistry.
That game, but they're eventually going to run into a team that was not going to allow them to do that. And UCLA was that team. They never slowed down, never really had any breaks in their scoring, and Carolina just was not able to keep up. And, when you talk about the lack of presence from Camila Cardoso not being there for Carolina underneath the basket, eventually you're going to run into a team that does have that presence, and that's exactly what UCLA had with Lauren Betts. And she went out there and did exactly as many feared she would against Carolina with 14 rebounds on Sunday, in addition to her 11 points. So again, when you go up against teams that also don't have the size, I think Carolina can be just fine. But when you go up against one of them that does, they just don't have what they need to take advantage of that.
And that is the problem, is that you're totally spot on, man. I think when you face a team like that, it's going to have that big woman in the paint and stuff. South Carolina can try their best, but I don't think they're really going to be able to match up with those types of teams right now. Not unless something magical happens and they just magically turn it on and stuff. If they're going to win games, they got to shoot the lights out. Like, they got to shoot better than 36%. I think 8 of 12 from 3, like I said, is a good start. Tina Pau had a great game yesterday. But you also need to be able to limit these turnovers. Like, again, Joyce Edwards, for playing 17 minutes, she seems to still have the turnover bug with 3 of them in that time. And look, you also need better shooting performances. I'm seeing a lot of 1 for 5s, 1 for 7s. I mean, look, you have Chloe Kitts, Bree Hall, Raven Johnson, Maddie McDaniel, all hit 1 shot in this game. That is not good enough. You have to be better than that. You cannot just be relying on Pau and Tessa Johnson to score your buckets. And Malaysia Fulwiley only played 3 minutes in this game. I've seen that as something thrown around that's an issue. So, look, it's a good loss for Carolina in the fact of, the 43-game win streak came to an end, and they were bound to lose at some point. Maybe it takes the pressure off them. But, I mean, look, the stretch only gets tougher because you play number 8 Iowa State on Thanksgiving. So you really got to turn it around quickly and get it going, because this can turn into a losing streak rather quickly if you're not prepared.
Well, the question becomes, and we've talked about this for a while, and not that you ever want to lose a game, but would Dawn Staley be open to something like this happening? Said you have a very short turnaround for you're down in Fort Myers playing Iowa State here in a couple of days.
Yeah, and I think I've said it before this stretch even began, but these next 5-6 games, I think it's every game leading into South Florida later in December. We're going to learn a lot about this team because, look, they got Fort Myers this week. They play TCU pretty soon out in Fort Worth. We are going to learn plenty about this team, and look, SEC plays around the corner. That's where it's going to get really tough. That's where big girl basketball is going to be played. Carolina, I think they're going to be fine, but we see the flaws in their team. Now can Dawn and the coaching staff and the players kind of fix them so where it's like, okay, we can get by with what we've got.
We'll see what happens. 1 hour in the books. Hour and two of the Extra Point coming up next. Jack, I'll check in with you coming up at noon for the halftime show as well.
Yeah, looking forward to being back on, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Is the Extra Point on your Reaction Monday here on the game? Tyrad, once again, telling you about our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist. I tell you all the time, you need to be mindful of what's going on around your home, especially if you start to notice some weird things that are happening, with things happening around your home that you may not notice, things like cracks in your exterior brick, cracks in walls or above windows and door frames, doors or windows that might be sticking on uneven or bouncy floors, or cracks over your garage door. If you notice any of these problems with your home, then you need to check out our friends over at Canty Foundation Specialist. Go online, schedule an appointment today at cantyconvicts.com. They'll send a professional out to your home to evaluate what's going on with your foundation and get it fixed right so you and your family can live comfortably going forward. Again, go online to schedule an appointment today at cantyconvicts.com for our friends and the foundation experts over at Canty Foundation Specialist. 10 o'clock, welcome back in. It is the Extra Point. Tyler and Sam Shapiro along with you from WIS as we make our way through a Reaction Monday. Start of rivalry week, and I can't think of a better way to go into a huge matchup against Clemson this weekend than Carolina on a 5-game winning streak, which you said a little bit earlier on was the best active winning streak in the SEC as of right now, as they picked up the routine win over Wofford on Saturday, 56-12, and now set their sights ahead to the Palmetto Bowl this weekend.
Yeah, and I was listening to you guys on the way over here, and I heard Jack say I think this is the longest win streak Gamecocks have had since 2013.
Yeah. That's correct.
I mean, you can't be more excited than I guess those fans were back then. And I remember when we were talking at the beginning of the season, we were saying,
I don't know if that's going to happen or not, what the committee ends up doing tomorrow night in terms of their latest ranking is going to tell us a lot about if Carolina still has a shot at this. But going to the weekend, taking on what's I'm assuming going to be a higher ranked team than you in Clemson certainly gives you an opportunity to make one more case for yourself before you have the conference championship weekend off here in a couple weekends to maybe, if chaos continues to fall, get yourself in the top 20, get yourself into that coveted top 12.
Well, and even with Texas A&M and Bama, how they kind of shaped up this weekend, you know, if USC kind of continues to ride on that high horse they're on and make it 6 wins closing out the season, I think they're making a lot better of a case than either of those SEC teams are right now.
Let's hear from Coach Beamer after the game on Saturday. Just talking about the significance, cut number 14 here, Corey, about winning 5 games in a row.
Yeah. Testament to the young men in our program that we were, 3-3, gotten better. That's just something that we pride ourselves on around here. You go back to 21 when we, won 2 out of 3 down the stretch against who was at Auburn and North Carolina in the bowl game, or 2022 where we finished with wins over Tennessee and Clemson, or 23 where we won 3 out of our last 4 as well. We've played pretty good ball in November, and I think it goes back to our weight room program and how we do things during the season and throughout the year so we can be built and trained to be our best at the end of the season. It goes back to the way we practice as well. We don't, we try and get better. We're not taking care of ourselves. I mean, we're taking care of our bodies, but we're not, we do a lot of competitive things in practice, and there's a lot of first-team offense versus first-team defense, and there's also a lot of developing young guys throughout the season, and that's allowed us to play pretty good football in the month of November.
And speaking of the month of November, we've talked about this the past couple of weeks. Carolina's playing its best football as right now. I don't know what the rhyme or reason is to why Coach Beamer teams just play better in the last month of the year, but they're certainly doing that again on this winning streak that dates all the way back to the Oklahoma game in October. And again, the offense once again showed on Saturday that they are clicking on pretty much all cylinders for the most part. Still a little left to be desired when it comes to the offensive line, but playing good football nonetheless. And even if you do end up getting left out of the playoff here, depending on what the committee's rankings are coming tomorrow, you can still say you're playing like one of the better teams in the country in the last half of the season.
Absolutely. I mean, we were maybe just a month or two ago, we were talking about here, if games are going to look how the Old Dominion game looked, how are they going to get through the rest of this regular season? And I definitely think neither of us expected the offense to be firing on all cylinders like this. Maybe we had a little bit higher expectations for the defense, but they've kind of exceeded those expectations as well. And I think that's been an absolute treat for this fan base to watch. And I actually think I saw somewhere, I think Beamer is the second coach along with Spurrier to start 8-3 within their first 4 seasons coaching. So to kind of see him come out and start this way to that, I would be happy if I were him too. It's a great way to that's a great name to be compared to so early on in his tenure here.
And Saturday's win was very significant on that front because he had his 28th career win as Carolina's head coach. It took Spurrier a full 4 years to do that, to get to that mark. Now, they did play one less game in his first year back in 2005, where they went to the 12-game schedule back in 2006. But Coach Beamer has the opportunity to potentially get to 30 wins for the end of year number 1 compared to against Spurrier, who only did it in 4 full seasons himself. So an opportunity to kind of set yourself apart. And it's so funny because through Beamer's entire tenure, people love to bring up that stat of, well, here's where Spurrier was, or here's where Muschamp was through X amount of games up to this point. And, going back to beginning of the season, I even saw some people saying, well, Muschamp had this many wins through X amount of games. And you haven't really heard that as much as of lately until, that stat popped up on Saturday watching the game. I'm like, it seems like when you're actually winning and doing well, people don't want to make those comparisons quite as much anymore. But nevertheless, a good company to be in with what Spurrier was able to do back 2 decades ago. And yes, it's a completely different college football now. So much has changed. The way you manage, teams and rosters and recruit and all that kind of stuff is way different than what Spurrier was doing. But Spurrier's best years came later on down the line. Once you got into year 5, 6, 7, that's when they really hit their stride. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen with Coach Beamer's teams. They're suddenly going to start winning 10, 11 games every single year. But you're seeing those same kind of very significant to mention going all the way back to the loss to Alabama, where at that point in time, we went ahead and wrote off any hope we had of this team making the playoffs.
Yeah.
So from a observer standpoint, we weren't looking at it as, well, your back's really up against the wall, you can't make any more mistakes now. We just kind of looked at it as, okay, you've already lost 3 games. We didn't think any three-loss team had a shot at the playoffs, so just go out there and see how many games you can win. And now you blink and you're 5 games later, you're like, wait a minute, you're 8-3, and you're, again, I don't know if they're going to make it in or not, but you're making a case for yourself to be at least considered to make it into the 12-team playoff. So, we talk about the Georgias and the Ole Misses and Tennessees and teams like that playing with no margin for error. Well, Carolina's played with no margin for error for a long time, too. We just didn't know they still had a shot at playing for the same kind of thing those teams were playing for.
They're basically playing with practically no margin of error through the entire month of October and pretty much through this month as well. I mean, their schedule, I feel like it was a little bit easier the last couple weeks comparatively to October. I mean, but when we were talking about LSU, Alabama, Oklahoma, we were talking about how they were going to get basically walked all over and absolutely destroyed. And we didn't really see that in either of those 3 games. I mean, LSU and Alabama, well, LSU, people will still say, the calls kind of decided that game.
Sure.
But Bama, I mean, we had multiple opportunities to kind of walk away with the game. And I don't want to say we laid an egg, but there were a couple plays, we kind of came up short. There were a lot of turnovers. I believe there was 1 interception, I think 10 minutes left in the game. And if they kind of just held the ball and ran, they probably could have came out of that game with the win. But, I mean, it's Alabama. So I get it was just those 2 games kind of slipped away, and it was very interesting to see how it'd be interesting to see how those teams would face up against each other now.
Well, and that's the unfortunate thing that you can't do when we talk about retroactively thinking about these teams when it comes to playoff rankings. You can't play the games again. You have to go off the one result you saw this year, whether that be in September, October, or in November. But there is something, just based on what I've known the committee to do for the 10 years that we've been doing this, there is something to how you play late in the season. It is definitely a have you done for me lately kind of approach to where, and I wish this wasn't the case, but this is how they do it. I wish more weight was put on things you did earlier on in the season, because I don't think Notre Dame's being punished nearly as much as they should be for their loss to Northern Illinois. But on the same side of the coin, I feel like Carolina is getting a little bit of a mulligan with some of the losses they had earlier on in the year to LSU, to Ole Miss, that, at the time obviously hurt. But now you have the opportunity to correct those kind of things here in these last couple of games.
Yeah, I think especially, I think sometimes the beginning of the season compared to where they are now gets outweighed more than just the overall resume of what has been accomplished throughout a season. And I think in terms of South Carolina, they make a good case on both sides of the coin in the sense that they started the season a little, people weren't exactly sure where they were going to stand. And then early enough on into the season, they kind of proved, hey, we're a strong team that can compete, and that's why we're making a good case. Versus rather you have some teams that come out really hot and kind of fizzle out towards the end, and then they just get booted out, or you have teams that kind of moseyed along a little bit of the way and then got hot right at the right moment. I feel like we saw that with Alabama last year. They got hot right at the right time, right at the end of the year, and then they completely just booted Georgia out. Or that might have been the year prior.
That was last year.
Yeah. Oh, it was. Yeah. So I think South Carolina, how they kind of peaked, I want to say they peaked right at the perfect time, because it wasn't quite at the end of the year, but it was early on enough into the season that I think they got enough steam to kind of carry through the rest of the year. Mm-hmm. But also to kind of to that point, yeah.
Yeah, well, Carolina got helped out quite a bit by the chaos that went around not only the SEC but all of college football this past weekend. We'll dive in to what exactly happened and who helped out Carolina and who potentially hurt them as well coming up next. But a reminder, it is Monday. Men's basketball taking on Xavier tonight. The Fort Myers tip-off, pregame cover starting at 8 o'clock for an 8:30 tip, which you can listen to all right here on the game as we get you set for rivalry week coming up with Clemson coming up this Saturday. It is the Extra Point, Towerhead, and Sam Shapiro from WIS hanging out on your Reaction Monday here on the game. 23 on the bumper.
He's excellent one-on-one. Dart to the sideline again. Is that intercepted by Dijon Johnson? It is. And that will end it.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour. And Sam Shapiro from WIS. That was the call on Saturday on ABC. Ole Miss falling in the swamp to Florida 24-17, a game that we think helps out Carolina's case for making the college football playoff, as the Rebels had no margin for error. They already had 2 losses, and many people thought they were in a great position to maybe being one of the best teams that could make the playoff and make a run to the national championship. That does seem to have gone out the window, and it's fitting that it ended on a Jackson Dart interception, because that was kind of the story of this game late, where Dart threw not 1, not 2, but really 3 egregious interceptions in this game to end up closing things out. And the funny thing, for those that didn't see the game, before that play that he threw the interception in the game on, essentially in the game, because Florida ended up running the clock out, he threw another interception the play before that, also egregiously, where he overthrows receiver. It got overturned because the ball ended up hitting the ground, and then he just proceeded to throw another interception after that.
That was the first thing I was going to bring up. He got so many chances to decide the fate of that game. And, I mean, yeah, the ball was on the ground, but I remember watching that and going, no way, he's going to get another shot at this. No way. He actually blew another shot at this. So, I mean, to me, that is more of an argument case why they shouldn't be in the college football playoff. But, I mean, yeah, I don't know.
I'm assuming this is probably going to be enough to keep them out. 3 losses, and especially and the nature of their 3 losses. So they've lost to a 500 Florida team, they lost to a really bad Kentucky team, and they lost to a LSU team that's looking worse as each week goes by. So they don't have they do have good wins, obviously, over Georgia and now to South Carolina as well. But those losses, I really think, end up kind of weighing them down here. Stats that really pop out to me for this game: Ole Miss had 2 turnovers on downs inside of Florida's 15-yard line. They were 0 for 3 in the red zone. So if you just think field goals, that's 9 more points that you left on the table. And look, Lane Kiffin is a very aggressive head coach. He goes forward on 4th down more than anybody. But in a game like this, it can really come back to bite you.
And in this case, it totally did. I mean, it was kind of just watching Florida kind of gain momentum on them kind of throughout the game. I mean, in the beginning, it seemed like Ole Miss kind of had control on both sides of the ball, really what was going on. And then, they kind of just made a couple mistakes, and it kind of let Gainesville get a lot of momentum that they really needed to make some big pass plays that set them up to score early on. And, eventually Ole Miss kind of got to a point where they weren't really in a position where they could catch him at the end of the game.
Let's hear from Lane Kiffin after the game, talking about missed opportunities for his team. Cut number 24 here, Corey.
All right, so obviously very disappointing outcome today. A game of a lot of missed opportunities. Go 0 for 3 in the red zone, get no points out of a missed field goal, and get stopped twice on 4th downs. Lose the turnover margin in a tough place to play against a team that, has played really good when that quarterback plays. Credit to him. It's a really good player that made a lot of plays in the first half when we had him back there. So it's really disappointing in the outcome. And obviously a lot was at stake, and we didn't come through. So a lot of missed opportunities. So
it is ironic to me, and it wasn't lost on a lot of people over the weekend either, that, Lane Kiffin, like last week, was one of the coaches talking about, well, you don't really want to play in the SEC championship game because it almost sets you up better for the playoff because you get the bye on the front end and have time to rest before that first round game. Well, now they don't have to worry about either one. They're not going to the SEC championship game, and I'm assuming, and again, a lot of chaos happens, so we'll see what the playoff rankings look like. I'm assuming they're not going to be going to the college football playoff either, so you gotta always be careful about how you say things.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I don't know. I kind of just look at this dilemma now with South Carolina. They both got 3 losses. When you look at like you were kind of talking about the Ole Miss losses to Kentucky, I mean, the Gamecocks beat this Wildcat team, dominantly, and that I believe was, early on into the season when we didn't know what the offense was going to be. And then when you talk about LSU, I mean, that was a game the Gamecocks should have had the potential to walk away with. And, Ole Miss is losing to that team too. So those are 2 comparative matchups where the Gamecocks could have had the last laugh anyway. And because the hottie toddies didn't necessarily have that, in those case scenarios, I think if they're going to be ruled out and, South Carolina's, kind of peaking at the right time, I think it's making the good case for an SEC swap, at least for the football playoffs.
As far as other disappointments, cut number 22 here, Corey, is Kalen DeVore after a very disappointing night for the Crimson Tide.
Obviously extremely disappointed, frustrated. Just, we worked, I thought, extremely hard all week. Put a plan together, guys. Good energy. Excited to come here on the road. We gotta play better. We gotta be better in all ways. And, there's some simple things, uncharacteristic things. I think that happened early in the game where we didn't get the momentum on our side. And then really it comes down to the end of the first half. Them scoring a touchdown, and then the turnovers. Really kind of changing the momentum of the game there. So, turnovers were going to be a key. We said that coming in. We knew taking the ball off them like we did early was going to be big. In the end, it flipped the other way. We turned the ball over. So, credit to them. They did a nice job with their game, their run game, staying on the field early. In the first half, especially, I thought. There's some things that we continue to tweak and adjust to do a better job against it and what they were doing there. But obviously the game got away from us in the middle of the third quarter there.
Alabama falls to Oklahoma, 24-3 out there in Norman. Controversy abound in this game. We'll get to some of that in just a second. Let me give you a padlock stat, which is a stat that if I told you this on Friday before the game, you could have easily figured out which way this game was going to go. Oklahoma ran the ball for 260 yards. If you run for 260 yards on anybody in the SEC, you're probably not losing that game. Alabama could not stop them to save their life on the ground.
Yeah, and offensively, they just got so much. I don't know what it was, but that Oklahoma backfield just – they found so many great gaps in the middle of that Alabama defensive line to the left. So many jet sweeps to the left, but they really capitalized on that run game. Just taking advantage of an Alabama defense that looked like it had a couple holes in it. And I definitely think one of those scores that Ryan Williams had should have stood, but I mean, I think it was the first time since 2011 Alabama's walked out of a game without a touchdown.
No, first time since 2005. I believe it was against Carolina. It's been the first time they walked out without a touchdown since 2011 when they played the game of the century against LSU. First time without scoring more than 3 points since, I believe, Carolina back in 2005. So very rarefied air. And there was controversy. So at the early fourth quarter, down 24-3 at that point in time, Jalen Milroe uncorks a long, 40-yard bomb, and Ryan Williams, I don't know how he got his foot down. He makes this athletic, acrobatic catch, is able to get his foot down, but they ruled it illegal touching because the officials said he was covered up on the end of line of scrimmage. He was not. That was a very incorrect call. I don't know what they were looking at. That ended up hurting Alabama there. Now, that being said, I don't know if they come back and win the game. There was a touchdown earlier that they had ruled he'd been out of bounds for that also prevented him from getting on the board. So I don't know if it changes the outcome of the game, but in terms of momentum, Alabama getting a touchdown to cut it to a 2-score game early in the fourth quarter could have been really huge. Unfortunately for them, it didn't happen. And once again, we're having to talk about officiating in the SEC.
And once again, we're talking about, the possible what could have been. But I think that, I remember watching that play and thinking this could be a, major momentum changer in this game if Alabama is going to, pull a resurgence, a can of kick some butt out of their, artillery, then this would be the time they're going to do it. But, calling that back, can suck the life out of anybody. So it makes sense why, they didn't come back after that. But
Jalen Milroe struggled mightily in this game. His worst game as far as completion percentage on the entire season, threw 3 interceptions. One thing that really stands out to me, and not just on Saturday against Oklahoma, but in all their losses this year, in their 3 losses this year to Vanderbilt, Tennessee, and Oklahoma, Jalen Milroe's ran for 28 total yards in those 3 games. When he cannot use his legs, when he cannot expand this offense and open things up, they struggle. And that's exactly what happened once again against a good and solid Oklahoma defense.
And that's also a huge part of his game as well. Like, I think a lot of how he makes some of those big, the 40-yard completion that ended up getting called back. I think a lot of those plays he creates because, he can use his legs so much to kind of divvy up or, just kind of facilitate where his offensive pieces are moving throughout the game. So I think when he's limited to not being able to move around so comfortably, I think it forces him to make plays that he wouldn't necessarily make. It makes him a little bit uncomfortable, and it clearly, has made a mistake for a lot of him in multiple games this season.
Well, Alabama and Ole Miss, again, both suffering tough losses to unranked teams on Saturday, potentially killing any hope they have of making the college football playoff, and we'll see what the rankings end up looking like come tomorrow night with the playoff committee ahead of rivalry weekend to close out the regular season. Biggest game of the weekend was happening in Columbus, Ohio, as the Indiana Hoosiers rolled in at number 5, taking on the number 2 Buckeyes. Ooh, kind of went the way most people expected it to. We'll hit that coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Sam Spear from WIS on your Reaction Monday here on The Game.
Well, we say leave no doubt. And, these guys want to finish the game the right way. Travion did the right thing going down at the 1-yard line. We ate up the clock. We don't want to put the defense back out there. You just never know in games like this. It's a top 5 matchup. So we wanted to finish it the right way and make sure that everybody knows that this is the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour. Head and Sam Shapiro along with you from WIS. Can't think of a team that sprung a leak more than Indiana over the weekend to win in to Columbus and lost 38-15 in a game that, I don't know, I think a lot of us saw it coming. Ohio State's a very polarizing team that is very easy to root against, and one that I think most people were rooting against, though I don't know how many people actually had hope that Indiana was going to be able to go in there and pick up the victory. And give credit to Coach Signetti in Indiana. They run undefeated, 10-0 up to this point, though they played a very weak schedule. And going into Columbus, taking on the number 2 team in the country was going to be a daunting task, and it was very clear they were not up for it.
Yeah, this was a big test for the Hoosiers, and I think the only thing that read on the final test score was, sorry, you are still a predominantly basketball school. So, unfortunately, it was kind of tough to see them lose. I know my buddy who went to IU was definitely upset to see them get, I guess, manhandled in that way. But, I mean, they looked good through the first quarter. It could have still been anybody's game really kind of, going into the end. But I think, like you kind of said, Ohio State was not walking out of there without a W, and they kind of realized that going into that second quarter.
Here's some stats for you. Indiana had a total of 151 total yards in this game. Ohio State got 5 sacks and 8 tackles for losses. And Indiana only had 3 drives of more than 30 yards. One of those being their opening drive where they went in for a touchdown. So that kind of tells you the story of how this game was probably going to go.
Yeah, it almost kind of seemed like they ran out of gas after that first. I mean, that first touchdown pass was a pretty good drive. It was a nice, score in the end zone. But I mean, some of the hits in this game too were just really brutal. Like both teams kind of looked like they wanted to kill each other at certain points in the game. And I think Ohio State has more kind of experience kind of doing that for 4 quarters than maybe Indiana or this Indiana team. But I feel like this was not Ohio State's first rodeo and being in a position like that, and the potential fraud means were definitely abundant after this weekend.
I know a lot of people kind of look at that first drive for Indiana and want to say, hey, well, they got a chance here, but I don't put as much stock into scripted drives as I do what happens after that, because scripted drives, that's plays you've been working on all week, and it also kind of develops your flow for what the game's going to be and what your game plan is going to be after that. So it's the plays after that where you're having to adjust is what really matters. And once they got past that, outside of the very late touchdown late in the game to make the score look a little bit better, they did pretty much nothing. And Ohio State, for good measure, decided to tack on an extra score, as you heard Ryan Day talk about there at the very end, to, like you said, leave no doubt and make the score the 23-point game that it ended up being.
Yeah, I think that they, kind of came into the game hoping to just set the stage really, okay, we set the stage to have upward trajectory and momentum through the rest of the game, but setting the stage is not, doesn't necessarily get you to the finish line. It can get you to a good starting point, but it can't necessarily finish the job. And I think Ohio State did a very good job nipping that in the butt before it developed really into anything.
So the big question coming away from this game is what happens with Indiana? Do they deserve to stay in the college football playoff? Cut number 30 here, Corey. This is Coach Signetti after the game answering that question.
Is that a serious question? I'm not even going to answer that one. The answer's so obvious.
And look, what do you expect? What else do you expect the head coach of the team to say? Yes, please keep us out. Like, no, he's going to fight for his team to make a case there. But again, you give them credit. They were 10-0 against a weak schedule, and you can't control what your schedule is within conference and who you're going to play and all those kind of things. And they won those games pretty handily. But when you finally got tested by a top 5 team, a team that, based on the rankings, you were supposed to be in the same neighborhood as, it clearly was not the case. And don't know, especially with all the other chaos with Alabama losing and Ole Miss losing and all that kind of stuff, I don't know if you fall completely out of the top 10, but them being 9th, 10th, maybe even as far as 12th or 13th, I could see it. I could see a lot of things happening. I'll say that much.
There are definitely going to be a lot of, like you mentioned, with Alabama and now Ole Miss, there's going to be a lot of moving parts, just especially over the next week. But I think that this Ohio State team has really actually proven that they're a very tough team. I mean, they had another toss-up game with Penn State where Penn State could have just walked all over them, and they pretty much just destroyed Penn State. So I think they've come. This was kind of the second time I feel like they've been tested against a team like, are they fraud? Potential frauds, and I think they kind of. I don't want to say they proved that necessarily Penn State were frauds because Penn State still looked pretty strong this season. But I think to take Indiana out of the college football playoff because they lost to arguably the second best team in college football right now is a bit of a stretch.
Here's where the debate comes in, and I've said this many times. The college football playoff is a TV show. It is a made-for-TV product where they are putting teams together that they think have a shot at competing for a national championship. It seems like, no matter what the record is, it seems like Indiana, if you paired them against an Ohio State, an Oregon, a Georgia, a Texas, they would not be able to hold a candle to those teams and might get blown out just like Ohio State did to them this past week. And I think that is what is going to be the big reason for concern around them when it comes to potentially keep them in the top 10, because that's what it would be to be in the playoff as of right now, because I don't know if they can stack up to any other team. Now, we can't go off of the I think and I think and I think system with all things, but again, that sample size of one game was pretty ugly.
Yeah, it definitely didn't make for a good recipe for entertainment factor, especially if you're, looking for a game that, a championship game that's going to have a lot of eyes on it. So I think, when you're talking about teams like Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, I think, those are teams that are really going to be exciting to watch and, could really put on a show competing for a national title versus, when you're showing, when you bring up examples like this weekend with Ohio State and Indiana, where it wasn't really a show, it was kind of just a showcase of Indiana getting destroyed. I think, that's not necessarily as entertaining or necessarily what people want to watch for a national title game. As the season progresses.
And it's not the national title game, it's just the playoff games in general, because you would have to win multiple games to even get to the national championship. But on what is supposed to promote more excitement from what's been largely dull playoff games for the better part of a decade, where we've had a lot of blowouts, I don't think they want to put in a team that they think has the possibility of getting blown out in that first round, whether it be as a home game or an away game or whatever it may be. Because, again, I didn't see a lot of good things from Indiana this past weekend that would give me reason to think, okay, well, that was just one bad game. I think they'll be fine if they played, Oregon or another team like that a little bit later on down the line. I just think they're not a great team overall, despite the fact that they're only 11-1.
Yeah, I think
10-1.
Well, I think it would have definitely helped if they put up a little bit more of a fight than just that, that one drive in the first quarter that, again, kind of maybe set the stage for them to have a decent game. But like we were kind of saying, they kind of just lights on, no one home throughout the rest of the game. And I think that just, like you were kind of saying, it wasn't, eye popping that, if this team, is in contention to make a run for that title, that they're going to, put up a good case and, fight the good fight. They're kind of showing that more, they probably have a better chance of getting blown out.
I want to remind you about the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Contest. Rolls on for another week. $1,200 up for grabs as the Gamecocks take on the Clemson Tigers this upcoming weekend. Go online if you have not already to 1075thegame.com and register to win the Lawyer Lisa Special Teams Contest. Coming up next, as always, on Mondays, hit the oddities of college football. What weird things happen across this great sport over the weekend? That's coming up next. It is the Extra Point. Tyler Head and Sam Spear from WIS here on your Reaction Monday on the Game. Welcome back in. It is the Extra Points Hour. Head and Sam Shapiro from WIS with you on your Reaction Monday. Taking a look at everything that happened over the weekend in college football. We get to our oddities of college football segment. And this year, I feel like more than any year in recent years past has had a lot of field stormings, which, hey, when you have upsets like we've been seeing at a pretty high clip, you get a good many of those. Two in particular, though, this weekend stuck out to me because they were both a little premature. So Oklahoma stormed the field in their defeat of Alabama about 28 seconds too early, to which they had to clear the field. And that took a couple of minutes before they could run the final kneel-out play to run the clock out. And then Arizona State, in taking down BYU and putting themselves in the driver's seat to make the Big 12 championship game and potentially the playoff, they stormed the field when they thought time had run out. And Kenny Dillingham, their head coach, was literally in a crowd of people as he was being told by the officials, no, wait, there's 1 second left, which gave BYU the opportunity for a Hail Mary, which they came up only about 5 yards short of the end zone of getting. So I implore anyone, and again, we had our own field storming here against A&M a couple weeks ago, make sure it's at all zeros before you storm the field.
Or that, there's no time stamp on the clock, that it just says final, because then for sure that there, can't be anything on the clock hanging on. But even in that Oklahoma game, I mean, I think the goalpost was getting knocked down and there was still 28 seconds on the clock.
And again, it was a kneel out. It was an inconsequential play that was not going to change the outcome of the game. But in the Arizona State game, and I don't blame those fans as much because it did seem like time had run out, and they went back and reviewed and added 1 second on the clock because the ball that the BYU quarterback thrown had hit something out of bounds, was still a tick on the clock to put it back on. So that's a little different, but the fact that we had two premature field stormings only hours apart on Saturday is always really funny.
It's kind of funny that they happened same day, kind of the same time, totally unrelated, because it's like when you look back on it, we'll look back on it in a week and just go, remember how there were multiple storms that are not sandstorms going on in the world of college football this weekend?
Well, and Oklahoma had to pay Alabama a nice $100,000 check for that field storming on Saturday.
As if they probably haven't gotten enough checks paid to them for teams storming them.
Here's the funny thing is and the SEC redid this going back a year ago, where they this past year, where they restructured the field storming as well as court storming, that depending on how many times you've done it, the price would go up. So you go to $100,000 to $250,000 to $500,000 and so on and so forth as a deterrent from wanting fans to do it. Do you think there's any fan that was at Gaylord Family Stadium on Saturday in Norman, Oklahoma, thinking about how much it was going to cost the university if they stormed the field?
Oh, those guys are drunk. They're not thinking about it.
Absolutely not. And we saw it here with Carolina when it happened against A&M. They can put the message up on the board. Fans, you're not allowed on the field after the game. You can put those little security guards in their yellow jackets out there holding hands, trying to prevent people from coming on the field. When it is 90,000 to 100, guess who's going to win?
I mean, I don't know what it's going to take. Well, what do you think it would take to get people to not physically storm the field?
Unless you go the route of, and this has happened in years past, like Tennessee, where you are threatening people's season tickets, which, again, when you're talking about tens of thousands of people, you're not going to do that. That would be, in my opinion, the only way you would make people think twice about it.
Right. I mean, you wouldn't just put up, like, plexiglass or...
You can put plexiglass up around a football field.
Yeah.
By the way, you can tear plexiglass down if you have enough people.
Yeah. Well, if you got a sea of excited fans, is going to knock down some plexiglass.
Let's go to Piscataway, New Jersey. Rutgers was leading 31-30. Illinois lined up for a last-second field goal. Greg Schiano iced the Illinois kicker. He missed the field goal, and Illinois decided, well, heck, why don't we just run a play instead on 4th and 13 with 14 seconds left from the 40-yard line. Hit Luke Altmaier, the Illinois quarterback, hit his receiver over the middle, who proceeded to run in basically untouched from 20 yards out and score the touchdown to win the game, as Illinois likely stays in the top 25 with that.
Well, that was a huge, like you kind of just said, that was a huge play for them because it keeps them in the conversation at the right time in the season. It's always exciting to see plays like that. I mean, I feel like this was a little bit comparative to the madness that was going on with the Commanders and the Cowboys this weekend. I don't know if you caught that game with the back and forth just in the last 2 minutes of that game. I mean, this was kind of like almost like that 2.0 with, well, in the case of the Cowboys Commanders, it was a shanked missed extra point that, made things, that shook things up a little bit. This is a missed field goal, which, different, same practice, different position in terms of how the game kind of played out, but definitely funny to see Illinois get the last laugh.
And lastly here, one more that we hit. Air Force picks up the win over Nevada, 22-19. For the first time this year, we have a team with 0 passing yards winning a game as Quentin Haynes 0 for 3 through the air. Did run for 68 yards and a touchdown as the Falcons ran for 319 on the Wolfpack on Saturday.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of this, this game, like, how are you going to be the Air Force and have all your yards on the ground?
Well, service academies typically run the triple option, which they run highly effectively.
I'm just joking.
I'm surprised it's taken us, which I guess is not surprising considering the fact that Army and Navy have thrown the ball a little bit more this year, but we've gotten to week number 13 essentially before we finally had one of these this year.
Yeah, I think Quentin Hayes, maybe his arm was feeling a little bit sore over the weekend, wanted a break. He told his running backs they could put the offensive load on their back this weekend. I mean, they had 3 guys combined that I think rushed for over 270 yards. So, I mean, it's not like they didn't get it done.
That's right. Good weekend for the Air Force Academy. They're picking up that win 22-19. That'll do it for today's edition of The Extra Point. Coming up next, Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. We'll get back into South Carolina versus Wofford and start looking ahead to Clemson as well here on your Reaction Monday on the game. 11 o'clock on your Monday morning. Welcome in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Tyler, West, and Chris, along with you on your reaction Monday, coming off of the 56-12 victory for the Gamecocks over Wofford. 5-game winning streak, improving to 8-3 on the year, and what ended up being a comfortable win on Saturday. Little shaky there in the first half, to say the least, but the Gamecocks got it in gear and did what they needed to do in the second half to cover the spread at the very end. Shout out to Bradley Dunn.
Yeah, Bradley Dunn there at the end, and it was sloppy at first. I think, Carolina just did not seem locked in at all. Some penalties, an interception, a busted alignment on the first play that led to a long catch and run for Wofford. And, Chris and I already did our podcast this morning. We were talking, you never really felt like the game was in any doubt watching, but at the same time you were sort of like, all right, when are they going to put this thing in gear and kind of lock in? And I thought that the end of half drive, which we see yet again South Carolina executing at a high level in a 2-minute drill, that's something that we've seen the last couple of games. They've been highly efficient in the 2-minute drill, going back twice against Missouri. Really, I count the other drive in the fourth quarter against Missouri as well. And then, of course, driving down there at the end of this half and extending the lead. And then, from that point forward, it was really as sloppy as it was at the beginning. I think they scored touchdowns on 6 straight drives to finish the game. And so you really only had one punt. Carolina puts up over 600 yards of total offense and about 280-something on the ground when you take out the sacks. And just overall, it did feel sloppy at first, but ended up being a pretty dominant day when it was all over with.
Bad ball is what Beamer said. And I mean, it was that, but it was kind of interesting because you're sitting there 14-9 with Wofford having just scored, missing the 2-point conversion, and Carolina got about to get the ball back, and you're sitting there going, man. And I mean, I literally texted Wes like, this is ugly. And it was. But you weren't sitting there going, is this team on upset alert? Like, you just didn't feel that way. You could kind of see Carolina had played pretty poorly in, well, you probably could say all 3 phases of the game at that point. They'd made enough plays to still be ahead. But you kind of felt like there's going to be a regression to the mean here. Carolina will probably not screw up as much in the second half. They've got a chance right here before the half to go down and score, which they did, as Wes said. You get the ball back in the second half. So they were able to clean some things up. I think the game had some of everything in terms of negatives, right? You had penalties that put you behind the sticks. Wofford opens the game with an explosive play because you had basically a miscommunication. You were just outnumbered because you didn't check your defensive call as you should have. Penalties. You had an uncharacteristic interception from Lenora Sellers. I mean, you go later in the game, you have a punt that was so bad by Wofford that your guys don't get out of the way. I mean, it's kind of a combination of bad luck and bad play. You had Wofford throwing the kitchen sink, in Carolina, kind of not being unexpecting of a fake, but just not executing it well, right? So a lot of execution problems, but the mark of a good team is rebounding from that. And this game was not as clean or as dominant maybe as the final score would indicate, but second half they came out, flipped the script, made big play after big play, and scored. I mean, just continued to score from that last drive before the half, after halftime, get the ball, keep scoring, and they were able to eliminate some of those issues.
Well, and like you said, even when you're sitting there 14-9, a couple minutes go before halftime, it was uncomfortable, certainly, but you never felt like the Carolina was out of control, and you figured they were going to get it in gear at some point. It's just very sloppy first half, and, you want teachable moments coming away from this game, especially ahead of a big game like Clemson coming up this weekend. So getting back to the penalty thing, which, again, Carolina for the last, handful of games when they've been on this winning streak has done a really good job of limiting their penalties. They hadn't had more than 6 penalties in a game since they played Ole Miss earlier on this year, and 6 of those penalties happened in the first half on Saturday. So that's something you need to address, obviously. And, Beamer said in his presser last Tuesday that, Wofford is a team that likes to run fakes, likes to do things on special teams to try and even the odds. And, you knew those things were coming. You just did not defend them the way you needed it to. And like I said, outside of that one play on the first play of the game where Carolina just didn't have the numbers in their favor when it came to the matchup, that Wofford didn't do a whole lot offensively that really made you go, wow. So outside of cleaning those things up, a good routine win. And again, if nothing else, build your confidence for this weekend's game against Clemson.
Yeah, and we'll break the game down like we always do, but I also think to a certain level, you don't put too much stock into any one thing in this game. It's like you get in there. It is, the atmosphere in the stadium is even a little bit different. Like it was a sellout. Credit to the fans for once again, all sellouts the entire year. But you get a little bit more. Wofford is more like, if you have young kids, maybe you take them. Maybe you've got family members that went to Wofford and they come to the game. It's like it was still a good atmosphere, but let's be honest, it's just not quite it's not quite the energy level that you get when you're talking about a big SEC game. So I thought Carolina, I don't want to say it was like sleepwalking, but there was a little bit of just maybe they didn't quite have that edge to start off that we've seen them have in some of these big games. But again, they did lock in. I think just Sellers again, man, 23 of 27, 307 yards, 3 touchdowns, did have the 1 pick. Then he rushes for 53 yards as well, 13 carries and a touchdown, Long of 15. And just he's been so good. I think part of the reason why you're not really concerned at all when this game, when Wofford was hanging around at the beginning, if this had been one of those teams that had just struggled offensively that we've seen over the years maybe, or if this had been one of those teams, if this was week 1, like the ODU game where you're kind of watching the offense and they're just not quite in rhythm or kind of out of sorts, maybe you are a little bit nervous. But I think we all knew with Sellers and Sanders and then even the way some of these receivers played in this game that eventually it would all click and they'd be fine. And Wofford just frankly just was not able to keep up. Like Wofford just did not have the talent at any position to keep up with Carolina in this game. And was good to see some older guys and some younger guys get into the game kind of on both ends of that spectrum. And you maybe wanted it to be a drive or two earlier than it ended up having to be. But ultimately, fourth quarter, you got a bunch of guys in. For the most part, you stayed healthy. Hope Dre Jacobs is okay. That looked very painful. Mm-hmm. So just hate that for him. But for the most part, in terms of the totality of the team overall, seemed to stay pretty healthy in the game too.
And I think, you're sitting there going, try not to look ahead too much, and try to watch this game and analyze this game. But I got to admit, you're sitting there watching this going, okay, this is ugly, but I think South Carolina will win. I honestly, at that point in the first half, I'm thinking, hey, I predicted, I think 41-7. Like maybe they don't get there, maybe. And Wofford scored a few more points than that, but so did South Carolina. I'm sitting there going, all right, what does this mean, going forward? This is obviously stuff that you have to clean up. It's stuff that you can get away with against Wofford. You start looking ahead to going up to Death Valley, you're not going to get away with it. You can't turn the ball over on special teams. You can't turn the ball over on offense. You can't have busted plays. You can't give up fakes. And so, honestly, even though I'll sit here and say, never look ahead, but I'm human, that's what I was doing over there. So that's been one reason. Look, there are a lot of reasons this team is in the position that they're in. Individual improvements, team improvements. But one of the big things you can point to is during this winning streak, they have played cleaner football than they were at the beginning of the year. At the beginning of the year, we were constantly talking about self-inflicted wounds and bad penalties and turnovers, right? That's been huge to this streak. Yes, the defense has kept playing well. Sellers has improved. The offense looks improved overall just as a unit. All those things count. All those things matter. But they've also just played cleaner. And so was this kind of a one-game aberration? Or, is it going to be a problem next week? And I don't know if we can answer that. I just know in this stretch, it seemed like more of an aberration.
Yeah, and I think, man, even it was kind of more of like a quarter and a half type. Like it wasn't
Right.
even the entire game.
That's
I
right.
think it was just about a quarter and a half. You're sleepwalking a little bit, and that happens in these games. You're still talking about humans. Even if it's an older team, you're talking about young men, and you do have the rivalry game on deck, and college football playoff talk, and just all types of other things. So I think there's a little wake up call there early on, like, hey guys, we got to just lock in a little bit and find a way to play our game, and they certainly did that. I thought there'd be a little bit more room to run early on in the game in terms of just your traditional hand the ball off to the running back and go. They had to run Sellers a little bit. Rocket did get going a little bit as the game progressed. Just thought they would kind of be able to knock him around a little bit more to start, but that part was not to be. And then just Sellers, I know I keep going back to it, but just special. And I don't think people talk enough about how good of a passer he is already in his career. Like, I know the run game and the run element, the run threat is kind of what makes it all almost work, and that's a great fallback option if nobody's open or the pass protection breaks down, or frankly, we've seen Carolina just go to that when they need a spark. But the ability to deliver the football is incredibly impressive as well, and we're only seeing that get better in terms of knowing when to deliver the football with some pace, when to use some touch, when to kind of layer the ball between levels of the defense. And I think just the comfort level in the passing game continues to go up at a impressive rate.
We'll take a look at some of the young guys that did get a chance to play a little bit later on in the game on Saturday. Coming up next, it is Rivalry Week, sponsored by our friends over at Columbia Craft on Green Street down in the Vista. A lot going on. Got men's basketball tonight taking on Xavier at 8:30. Pregame coverage starting at 8 o'clock here on the game. Tomorrow, the postgame show going to be live from Cato's Power Equipment, 4012 Beltline Boulevard. You can stop by and register for your chance to win Carolina Clemson football tickets, Carolina Clemson men's basketball, and Carolina Clemson baseball tickets as well. The winner going to be drawn on the early game coming up later on this week. And then on Wednesday, myself and Terry Ford going to be broadcasting live the halftime show at the Nest, 1331 Gadsden Street in the Vista, where you can also register to win those tickets as well. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Reaction Monday here on the game.
No.
All right, y'all, you know what time it is. 11:13 here on the game. Around lunchtime. And that means you can check out all the delicious lunch options at Firehouse Subs. Now 15 convenient locations all around the Midlands. No matter where you're at in the Midlands, there's a Firehouse Subs closest to you. Now, if you say, I've already got my lunch situated or whatever, dinner, catering, they can do it all for you. Shout out to our guy, Larry Chandler, owner-operator of all 15 Midlands Firehouse Subs locations. Use the Rapid Rescue to Go to order. If you're getting lunch or dinner, it'll be waiting on you when you get there. You can also order your catering online. You can do that at firehousesubs.com, or you can download the Firehouse Subs app. That's my favorite method. Download the app for free, register for a free account, and when you order Firehouse Subs, it'll not only be waiting on you when you get to the store, hot and ready for lunch or dinner, you also earn yourself some rewards toward future purchases. Firehousesubs.com or the Firehouse Subs app. Get it today.
Again, left side. Great cut, stepping at the 20, at the 10. Howell at the 5, breaks away again. And into the end zone. Touchdown, Carolina. Touchdown, Jawan Howell.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecocks.
Yards out, even up.
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you on your Reaction Monday here on the game. That was called the Gamecocks Radio Network. Jordan Howell finding the end zone for the, I believe, 7th touchdown of the 8th the Gamecocks scored on Saturday. And this is something that you always look forward to in a game like this, is getting the opportunity to see some younger guys or guys that have just not gotten as much run this year to be able to get out there on the field. And one of the guys we had talked about on Friday, hoping to see a good bit of on Saturday, was Jordan Howell, and he was able to find the end zone for the second time this year.
Yeah, not many carries for him. I would have liked to have seen maybe a couple more, honestly, just to get a more in-depth look at him. But, man, we saw on the one run the explosiveness and just some of that ability that we've heard a lot about. And, you know, Chris, I'm curious to see. I'm sure they're going to attack the portal a little bit at the running back position, because I think they're kind of going to attack the portal at about all positions to an extent. But I think looking at the guys on this roster, and you start looking at that running back position, we've heard a lot, obviously, about Matt Fuller, but Jordan Howell, you go back, there was some chatter, and you never know how things are going to play out, especially when it's this early, but there was some chatter back in the spring of, hey, Howell may be the number 2. Like, he may be the number 2 back on this team, and never quite played out like that. Obviously, you look at somebody like Rocket, who is going to get a lot of carries. Then you look behind him, Attaway is kind of the veteran second guy in there, of course. So Howell was going to have to do a ton if he was going to steal snaps from those two. But I do think there are some signs there of him being a guy who can make a major jump in playing time next year. Obviously, all dependent on what happens in the portal at that position as well.
I think Howell passes the eyeball test. Like, you look at this kid, I mean, what is he listed at, Wes? He is a big dude. Like, you look at him, he looks like an SEC running back, 6'1", 217. You know, he looks like one of these backs that, like, and I'm not saying he's as good as those guys at this point, but like one of those old Alabama running backs, like in the 2010s, that are just big kids who can run. And that is what he, you know, if you go back and look at what he did at SC State, I mean, dude, any level of football, you're out there averaging 8 yards a carry as a freshman, you're doing something right. And not 8 yards a carry and, oh, I got 10 carries on the year and I busted off one long run. No, he had volume and was just a man among boys at times. So made sense for him to move up a level. I think he belongs. We've heard good things. Very, very, very intrigued to see him next season. And I had the same thought during the game. You watch him make that run, the cut, the guys bouncing off of him. And I was not, oh, it's just Wofford. You know, it was almost one of those things where you can just see the size, the ability to move, you know, the ability to break tackles. I think that's something that maybe translates. And so next season is going to be significant for him. Going to be a very interesting running back room, I think, in general for South Carolina, because it's going to look different. But he's a guy that I think you circle right now as someone who could really see a lot more carries next season.
Yeah, and would be a just a little different style runner. He, I don't know, man. Like he's kind of one of those one cut and just explodes type guys to me. And I think there are some different things you can maybe do with him, and you know, the little, what would you call that, Chris? A little like kind of almost a little jump cut to get going, and then he's running through people, and then he stakes claim to the end zone there, I believe, is what that was. But yeah, I think he's probably your biggest standout in this game in terms of guys you look at that you say, all right, that's somebody who's going to potentially have a big role next year. Obviously, J.R. Johnson got a lot of snaps on defense, or relative to what he's been getting, and I think he's going to have to play a big role, as we know, next year at that position. I'll tell you the other just biggest takeaway for me, man, from the guys who played that don't normally get to play is, did you know Davis Bevel had ups like that?
I didn't. That's
a tall man.
That's a tall man, and then if he can jump pretty high, he's way up there.
Yeah, that was both impressive and kind of scary. I was like, Davis, what are we doing, my man? But, yeah, so.
We need to get that man a touchdown, too.
Yeah, well, he's got a touchdown pass.
Yeah, another one. I wanted a rushing touchdown for him. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they took a sack. Beamer was funny after the game. Like, took a sack. He was, like, very frustrated by that. But then that opened the door. Bradley Dunn getting an opportunity, get a touchdown. That was good.
What do you think of the sideline reaction to Bradley Dunn's touchdown?
That was awesome.
I mean, it was a explosion down there. Like, it looked like a World Series win or something.
Well, the staff loves Bradley Dunn. You know, I mean, he's and his teammates, obviously. I mean, this is a guy that, I mean, you remember, Wes, at the time, I mean, Jordan Birch, now at Oregon, Boogie, Bradley Dunn. You know, Bradley Dunn is a walk-on, and walk-on running back, good high school player at Hammond, and all he's done is come in, earn a scholarship, earned a scholarship this year, has just worked incredibly hard. So that was the coolest part of this game was seeing the guys that had earned, opportunities to come in and play. So, and he was out there, Wes, hobbling, he'd gotten hurt on that drive and just decided I'm scoring a touchdown on this drive. So it was awesome to see him get that chance. Local product, has worked hard, former walk-on, really cool stuff.
Yeah, a couple of other just late entries into the game, too, of guys that just haven't played or haven't really played much at all this year, which was good to see. What did you think of the little wrinkle at tight end with kind of getting Doty out there and some four-wide stuff, but basically he was taking the reps away from what would have been a tight end, and then Jatavius Shivers as well, sort of taking the role as the biggest tight end in the country and being kind of a sixth offensive lineman just about in those plays.
Had to get creative. I mean, you're down 3 tight ends in the game. No Josh Simon, no Brady Hunt. You won't have Brady next week either. And then no Michael Smith. So there's your top 3 tight ends. So I think we all figured, hey, we're going to see, more Connor Cox, more Nick Elksness, and we did. But the staff kind of took a multifaceted approach of, yeah, we'll play the backup tight ends, 4 through 6 or whatever it is. But then also we saw more 4 wide. We saw the extra offensive lineman with Shivers. And we saw Luke Doty, was a big beneficiary of that when they came out more in 4 wide. Doty, who we all talked about leading up to the game, hey, they're probably going to try to find a way, if possible, in this game to get Doty some opportunities. And those came early. He saw a lot of playing time in this game. Another guy the staff loves. Well-deserved. But, I think it was just a function of you had to shake things up a little bit. The tight end's very important in this offense. It's been a very productive position. It's important in the run game. It's important in the pass game. So you had to come up with some things there to kind of offset the losses that you had.
Definitely so. And again, Carolina able to pick up the 56-12 victory on Saturday, which we talked about going into the game, did not really provide Carolina an opportunity to help out their case very much when it came to the potential push of getting in to the 12-team playoff. But the things that happen around the country certainly do help South Carolina out, as it was a chaotic weekend, not only in the SEC, but in college football as a whole. We'll dive into some of that coming up next. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs and your Reaction Monday here on The Game.
All right, another one of our great partners here on The Game is our friends over at Integrated Media. Shout out to Michael and Nathan. Really appreciate what those guys do because they've been out to my home. They've been to Wes's home. They can come out to yours too. Help you with any of your home's audio-visual needs. You got holidays coming up, guys. Going to be a lot of gifts going around. If you need an idea for someone, or if you're planning on using some of the deals that are coming up this holiday to get yourself some new equipment, they can help you out with that. You don't actually have to go to the big box stores. They got a showroom in Chapin. They can source the equipment for you, let you know what's good, what's bad, what you should be using, all the best equipment. Integrated Media can help you with that. If you already have your equipment and you're like, man, I need somebody to mount this, I don't feel like doing it, don't know how to do it, they can do it for you. Everything from mounting a TV to security and cameras and complete smart home systems. IntegratedMediaInc.com or 803-948-8327.
Snap, pitch back, Reed rolls right, dropped! It was dropped! Auburn wins!
Welcome back in. It is the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs, Tyler West and Chris along with you On your Reaction Monday, that kind of capped off a day of chaos in college football that included many teams in the SEC, most of which ahead of South Carolina, ended up going down, that one being Auburn, pulling off the 4-overtime win against Texas A&M out there on the Plains. You also had Alabama getting just completely demolished by Oklahoma, though there was some controversy in that game, and then Ole Miss just falling on his face down there in Gainesville. We said going into the weekend, if Carolina wanted any shot at making the playoff, they're going to need some help. Well, they got quite a bit of help, not only in the SEC, but around the country as well on Saturday.
Hey, I told y'all, once the pressure starts to mount, teams, I don't know if they fold, but definitely with the amount of parity around college ball, you can get beat any week. And, especially you get into a road game situation. Vegas knows what's up, man. When you see that A&M and Auburn line being so small, and then you even have Nick Saban, of all people, giving that Auburn atmosphere as much love as he did in College Game Day. Like, home field advantage in college ball absolutely matters. There are certain places you just do not want to go at night. And that, I also say, that's one of the best football games I've ever just sat there and watched.
It was a thrill a minute, that's for sure. And it looked like it was going to be a blowout one way, and then A&M comes storming back. Then you get the overtimes, and I don't love the alternating 2-point conversions once you get past the second overtime, but it was exciting nonetheless. And then you have a dropped 2-point conversion that ended up ending the game. Crazy.
Feel for that guy, honestly. Shout out to my friend Marty, by the way. Great friend Marty. Gamecock fan. Wife is an Auburn grad. They went out to the game, traveled, took the kids. They had the TP ready to go. So they went out and did a little rolling.
Did they storm the field?
Of Toomer's Corner. I cannot confirm that.
Can't confirm that.
Know. Marty, text me or write in the Firehouse Subs text line. Let me know if you stormed the field. But they definitely did some rolling of Toomer's Corner. But, that was an exciting game. Anybody who's not been to Auburn, by the way, at night, that is a good atmosphere. If you get the chance to go, South Carolina at some point will be going with the way the SEC is going to be structured. You might not have to wait 15 years.
Within 4 years.
Within four years, you will get there. But, look, any given week, right? That was one where I think you said it, Wes. Really, everybody said it. 1.5 was the line. You're sitting there going, why? Like, look at these two teams' records. Look at the results. But home game, night game, Vegas knows. Ends up being a 2-point game. How crazy is that? And, back to the chaos. You didn't get everything that you could have gotten, but you got a lot of it.
Yeah, and I don't think you were going to get everything. I think you just needed to take some positive steps forward.
Keep chopping wood.
Like. Yep. By the way, I'm glad Auburn won the game because I have no dog in that fight. I was ticked at that offensive pass interference that they called on Auburn in OT.
That was the second
number
overtime.
2. Yeah.
Because that would have set them up first and goal at like the 4 or 5. They ended up having to settle for a field goal. That could have ended the game there. Obviously, they ended up winning the game regardless. But there was a few egregiously bad calls across the SEC this weekend.
The call before that should have been defensive pass interference or holding in the end zone. All that looked like Lambert Smith just almost like stopped on the play or something, but he was getting grabbed. They didn't call it, and then to turn around and call offensive pass interference, to not even have just the wherewithal of, okay, we let them play kind of skewed towards the defense on the previous play. Why wouldn't you just let them play skewed towards the off? And I don't even think it was the right call anyway. But even if it was close, that's incredibly frustrating to me. Like, just call the games pretty evenly. Like, I know there's going to be plays that could go either way, but either call it very aggressively or call it very conservatively in terms of what is a penalty and what is not. Alabama, the play you're talking about, it's kind of like the phantom offensive pass interference against Carolina, against Mazio in the LSU game, which I still maintain was the worst call of any of those calls in the game. I don't really know what was even seen.
So they were saying that Williams was covered up, which he wasn't. What's significant about this, though, that's the same crew that called the Texas-Georgia game a couple weeks ago. Think we have a problem with that crew?
We have a problem with a few crews.
But that one's taking the cake right now.
I'll tell you, if the SEC would, I mean, every week there's a field storming. They have that press release queued up, baby. I mean, that fine is ready to go.
Yep.
If they worked half as hard on the officiating as they do that, we might have something.
And I feel for a guy like Kalen DeBoer because, of course, at the beginning of his presser, he gets asked, hey, what do they tell you? What are your thoughts on this? And he can't say anything. He's like, they called it on the field. Is what it is. Can't go back and change it because he knows he's subject to get to a fine if he correctly calls out officials for making the wrong call. It's so convoluted and broken. I went back and read, Greg Sankey's statement a couple weeks back or before the season about officiating, and we think we got the best in the league, and there's always room for improvement. You can't look at what's happened this year in the SEC between Carolina, between Texas and Georgia, between what happened with Alabama and Oklahoma over the weekend, and not say you have a serious problem. So I know Sankey's spending so much of his time trying to leverage for a 94-team playoff so we can get all 16 SEC teams in, but you need to spend time focusing on this because this is a real issue.
Tyler's fired up. I love it. I mean, you're right.
I'd be down for that, by the way.
The part that makes me the most upset about it is not even the product, which is bad.
Yeah.
It is the gaslighting of Greg Sankey telling us that we're not seeing what we're seeing and saying things like once again, he used the same terminology as he did 5 years ago when the officiating in the South Carolina-Florida game prompted him to write a letter.
Yep.
Still out here writing letters 5 years later. Perfect. People want it to be. People do not want it to be perfect. We understand their judgment calls. We want it to be not egregiously bad. That's what we want. And then don't tell us that it's not when it is.
We want accountability. Because, again, if Kalen DeBoer went on a tirade and said, this is the stupidest bunch of referees I've seen in my life, they made terrible calls, it cost the game, guess what? He gets in trouble for it. But the officials who made the bad call, that even the announcing crew was a Herb Street and a Fowler on Saturday, they were saying, I don't know what the heck they're talking about. He was clearly not covered up. That just cost Alabama a touchdown early in the fourth quarter. Would have made a 2-score game. I don't know if that changed the outcome or not, but would have been huge for the momentum that they clearly needed at that point in the game. We don't even get a statement from the head official after the game. In the NFL, you at least get a pool reporter that says, hey, this call happened. What's your explanation on this? Whatever. We don't even get that. They are so protected as guys that are essentially rent-a-cops at this point in time. I was thinking about this over the weekend. The SEC is a penthouse of a conference with outhouse officiating. Is that fair to say? Because I think we've gotten to this point. It's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah, it's rough. And I think, you got to just make moves. One, for accountability. I think. Two, go ahead and make these actually full-time or higher-paying jobs to where there's then more accountability in terms of what is expected of you. Actually, right now, the fines for running out on the field for the fans go to the team that you just beat. What if we just took the fines and put them all into a big old pot, and then we could use that to hire some really good referees for the games?
And here's the thing. I don't care if you have to give them a desk job from January to late July. Do something. Make it where the majority of their time is spent learning how to enforce the rules of football, because I don't want somebody that is a lawyer 9 to 5 Monday through Friday hopping on a flight to Norman, Oklahoma and saying, oh, yeah, what's the rules this weekend? Because it's clearly not working.
And, guys, so the head ref, is in communication with somebody else that's not on the field, right? Mm-hmm. Can there not just be a push red button in case of emergency? We don't want this to be the norm. We don't want this to be there are so many, well, that can't be reviewed. Well, hey, that can be reviewed. Or that's a judgment. Hey, that's not a judgment. There needs to be a clause that just says break glass in case of emergency. Mm-hmm. This is potentially an egregious bad call. The button just pauses everything.
Yeah.
And they say, all right, on field, the guy in the booth or whatever, however you have to get it right.
Yeah.
Even if it's a rule, even if it's a play or call that does not fall under the normal rules of the game, get it right. The get it right rule.
Well, if this would have been in Tuscaloosa, all they would have had to do was throw trash on the field and cause a long delay, and they would have gotten it overturned, right? Because that's the precedent we set
that
a month and a half ago.
About that call, which they did get right, by the way.
Well, they got the call right, but the way they went about it was wrong. Like that's the problem here is we're doing things outside the realm of what's supposed to be possible in college football. Like this is a very clear issue. And again, how that same crew gets tasked with another important game that again altered Alabama's playoff hopes here. It's insane.
They probably didn't think it was going to be an important game when it got assigned.
Yeah, well, it ended up being an important game regardless. A lot of chaos happened this weekend, which will be beneficial to South Carolina. We'll dive more into the playoff rankings and stuff, certainly coming up tomorrow ahead of them being released on Tuesday night. I want to take a look at something Beamer accomplished over this weekend that I think is very significant. Hit that coming up next. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs on your Reaction Monday here on The Game.
All right, guys, this show brought to you by our friends over at Firehouse Subs. Hit them up today for lunch, almost lunchtime. Best way to do it, firehousesubs.com, or download the Firehouse Subs app and hit the Rapid Rescue to go. You're going to get points every single time you order fresh subs from our friends at Firehouse Subs. Also, Hot Sauce Bar is back. If you remember back in the day, you could walk in, you could pick out just feels like hundreds of hot sauces up there, whether you want them really, really hot or you want a more mild option. Bunch of options for you, Firehouse Subs. Also, Thanksgiving week. We've been telling you about it for a couple weeks now. Try the new Thanksgiving turkey sub, complete with carved turkey breast slices, dressing, cranberry sauce, and mayo, all served hot on a toasted sub roll. If you want to try something new, try that. But, of course, they always have your favorites with a bunch of options from our friends over at Firehouse Subs. Hit them up right now, firehousesubs.com or Firehouse Subs app.
Welcome back in. Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Tyler, West, and Chris along with you on your Football Friday. Not Football Friday. It's Reaction Monday. What? I'm getting too far ahead of myself.
Tyler.
I'm so ready for Saturday. Yeah. I'm trying to jump ahead to Friday. That's the problem.
It is exciting times.
We have a week worth of hate, though. It is Rivalry Week, sponsored by friends over at Columbia Craft on Green Street. So plenty of time to get into the hate of Clemson as the week goes along. But an interesting accomplishment on Saturday for Coach Beamer, his 28th win as a Gamecock head coach, tying him with Steve Spurrier the most through 4 years. Now, it took Spurrier all the way to the end of his 4th year to get to that point, and Coach Beamer obviously has 2 more opportunities against Clemson and a bowl game to get that done as well. So, it's interesting. Through the first couple years of Beamer's tenure, people always love to make that comparison. Oh, well, here was Spurrier through X amount of games. Here was Muschamp through around X amount of games whenever Beamer was kind of falling below that threshold. These past 5 games hadn't really got brought up a whole lot till you have the victory on Saturday.
Yeah, and a chance, like you said, to go even above and beyond what Spurrier did. And I think, guys, worth mentioning, it is not as if this program was in a fantastic spot when Beamer took it over. Like, yes, there was some talent to work with. There are some guys on the roster that you look back on, and some of those guys are in the NFL now. But I tend to think most SEC teams have some talent. Like you're not. It's nearly impossible to put together an SEC roster that doesn't have some guys with ability along the way. The problem is you're playing a lot of other teams that also have some guys that have ability, and you have complete teams that you're playing against. This was not a complete team by any means that Beamer took over. And, of course, as with any new coach, there have been ups, there have been downs, there have been everything in between. But right now, to have been 5-7 last year, you start to get a little chatter. You start to get people talking. Is Beamer the answer? I would argue that opposing coaches have really tried this past offseason to point to that and sort of push guys to something that really wasn't even, frankly, there, in my opinion, within the administration. But to me, to bounce back this year, do what they've done, to show that the model that they're using can work is obviously job's not done, but something to applaud for Beamer and company.
Isn't it crazy to think, just struck me while you were talking about that, the difference in the feeling and the narrative after game 1, which was a win, by the way.
Didn't feel like it.
Did feel like it until now. I mean, it is a big change. And, Wes, you and I sat down with Beamer, what was that, February, either January or February of this year. That seems like a long time ago, actually. And the offseason was not totally finished because at that time, James Coley was on the staff. That ended up changing. But, it was a kind of a tumultuous offseason with, Beamer's addressed this a little bit now after the fact, but he had a lot of pressure, a lot of noise to make more changes than he did, and so he used a combination of a lot of different things. Yes, he did shake up the staff. He dismissed a coach. He shifted some responsibilities on the coaching staff. He made some tweaks that weren't sent out in a press release or even maybe reported on, but there were other tweaks made. The strength and conditioning program, same coach, same staff, different approach this offseason. And then from a personnel standpoint, that was obvious. Even if you were somebody who said, fire the entire staff, start over, you would have recognized they got some personnel things they got to address this offseason too. And so Beamer has referenced this several times, there were a lot of guys that could have gone other places this offseason. And to his credit and the staff's credit, they were able to keep them in the fold, which was huge, and then add some pieces. So all the tweaks that he made this offseason, you look at the offseason that he had, it was a win overall. And he pushed the right buttons, really.
Yeah, he did. And I think, when you're a coach in this league and just really a Power 4 coach in general, I feel like you're always like a 5-game stretch from people crowning you and saying, hey, give this guy a lifetime contract. And you're always a 5-game stretch from people being like, oh, this guy's not the answer, get rid of him. And, the last 2 seasons are a perfect example of that. And, I think that's the life you live as an SEC head coach, and that is a constant. But right now, they've got it rolling. They've got momentum. They have momentum on their recruiting trail as well, and they can certainly take that momentum to an entirely different level with another win at Clemson this week. And, guys, what's on the line is right now, if you're Shane Beamer, you could be 2-2 against Dabo Swinney.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you look at the stretch that was going on when Beamer got here to South Carolina, that obviously would be a huge step forward.
A lot to break down as the week goes along, leading into South Carolina and Clemson coming up on Saturday. I'll do it for the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour presented by Firehouse Subs. Halftime show myself and Jack Beltry coming up next on your Reaction Monday here on The Game.
All right, guys, before I get out of here and hand the mic over, let me tell you about our friends over at Gold Line Framing, 511 12th Street, West Columbia, South Carolina, right across the river from here. And call them today, 803-739-1337. Go ahead and order a custom framing job. And really, they can frame up about anything you could think of. That could be a poster. That could be a signed print. That could be maybe other special items in your life. If you have tickets from old games, if you're a big-time fan, if you've been to a bunch of games, they could actually take those and put it in almost like a mural and frame that up for you as well. It is almost Christmas, so clearly gift buying season is here, and they've got not only some great gift items right there in store at Gold Line Framing, but you could give the gift of a custom framing job from Gold Line Framing as well. Again, that is 511 12th Street, West Columbia. Phone number 803-739-1337. Shout out to our friends Kendall and Johnny there at Gold Line Framing.